Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to chat with you guys a little bit about why we see so many injuries on the bench press. So let me put on my +5 out of weaponsmithing, work on skilling up my crafting a little bit, and let's talk about this. Alright guys, the bench press, America's favorite lift, probably the single most popular exercise in the gym, also the exercise that we see the most injuries on. And I think what we need to understand with that is not because the bench press itself is inherently dangerous. It's really no more dangerous than most other popular exercises. And honestly, performed correctly, it's a relatively low risk exercise. But there are things to be concerned about. So up front, one of the reasons we actually see so many injuries on the bench press relative to other exercises, I think it's fair to say because of its popularity. It is the one exercise that the majority of men who go to the gym do, right? It's if you go do a calculation and surveys of what different exercises different men perform through the week who go to the gym, you're probably going to find the highest frequency of the bench press being in there. So therefore, since more people do it, more people train it hard, guess what? More people get hurt doing it. That's just common sense. It's just like if the single most popular model of car in the world, there are probably more car accidents in that model of car, whichever the most people own, or in any given country, than other cars, purely because more people drive it, right? So the bench press, it's partially because it's just the single most popular exercise. But there are several things to consider with that. Its popularity also causes other problems with it. It causes other problems with it. And we can get into some imbalances and poor technique and everything in a minute, but because it's so popular, because it's considered to be a test of manhood, and there are young men involved, what happens as a result of that? Really bad technique and form oftentimes being used just so that people can push up more weight. And why does that matter? Because some of the techniques used are bad and people are always pushing themselves on it. And if lots of people are pushing themselves too hard on an exercise, the single most popular exercise, and one that again is very competitive, not just in powerlifting or tested for in football, that's a big part of it, that culture, but because men in general want to compete with other men on the bench press at the gym, guys who don't compete in anything. It's just one of those lifts because everyone's like, how much do you bench, bro? That's what everyone asks. So being able to inflate your numbers is a big deal. And that oftentimes results in not only people pushing themselves too hard, because we know excessive pushing, overreaching, overuse injuries can cause injuries on any exercise, right? That can contribute to injuries on any exercise, just that continual pushing to the bleeding edge. So that can explain some of them. The rest comes down to, well, not just the rest, but the next part of that is because it's so competitive, people do a lot of things to try to lift more weight. People tend to do a lot of bouncing the bar off their chest, which again obviously doesn't count in powerlifting or anything. We wouldn't count that as a legitimate bench press. But in weight rooms all around the world, particularly in the United States, but I'd say all around the world, because men are so competitive on this lift, they're doing a lot of cheating to move extra weight, and that can include, again, bouncing the bar off your chest, which can also lead to inconsistent bar paths, bad bar paths. Now, you start combining inconsistent bar path, inconsistent technique as a result of that, and using a heavier weight than you're technically capable of handling. You combine that with people pushing an exercise all the time because they see it as very important. It can contribute further to, again, overreaching type injuries, overuse injuries, because again, you start getting some stuff inflamed and everything, some connective tissue from doing it that way, and then you kind of slip out of your bad bar path, possibly due to fatigue, particularly when you start taking a lot of sets to failure and you're having someone help spot you. Your fatigue itself can contribute to some issues there that can cause problems. The next thing that we need to look at is muscle balance, right? Here's what it comes down to. A lot of men who are in the gym purely just to look better, not necessarily to be a better athlete, just to look better, tend to focus more on the muscles they see in the mirror. So it's pecs, biceps, delts, quads, if they train legs at all, right? Their abs, the stuff they can see in the mirror. They tend to neglect the muscles from behind. So what does that mean? Well, that means for a lot of guys, their rear delts. And yes, that has been confirmed with studies that one of the single most common imbalances in men who work out, men who train, is anterior deltoids being dramatically, disproportionately stronger developed compared to posterior delts. A lot of men don't train their rear delts and upper back and everything to the same extent that they do the front. And I'm not saying you need to necessarily isolate rear delts, but as a general rule, because a lot of guys out there not only do a lot of pressing for their chest, they're doing a lot of pressing for their shoulders also. So, two different, what they're thinking of as body parts get trained, whereas they might devote half of that time or less to the posterior end of everything. Well, you can imagine that can create some imbalances. And what do we know about muscle imbalances and injuries? Well, muscle imbalances themselves, even when form is good, particularly when fatigue and stuff starts setting in. But, even with good form or acceptable form, muscle imbalances can contribute to injury. So if you're extremely anterior dominant, and the posterior side of your whole shoulder joint and everything isn't up to speed, that could put you at risk for a shoulder injury, right? It could put you at risk of an injury. And it's something that needs to be considered, something that we need to think about with all this. So a big part of it has to do with the fact that a lot of people, if they're training the bench a lot and they're training a lot of just being anterior dominant because they're working on what they can see in the mirror more, not saying they don't train the other stuff, but maybe they neglect it a little bit because it's not as visible to them. So you can create some very serious muscle imbalances as a result of that over time can increase risk of injury. You can increase risk of injury. Then we come down to just sometimes bad form, bad techniques, and some injuries on the bench press literally have nothing to do with the form itself causing the injury, but actually dropping the bar on yourself. Because that is the one thing that we have to keep in mind with the bench press. The bench press, depending upon how you perform it and once safeties are in place and how you set up under the bar, you're essentially, potentially, depending on your bar pass, unracking an unsupported weight directly above your face, your throat. And because a lot of guys bench pretty high up on the chest, this is a technique issue still. If they do get pinned, the bar can roll to their throat or neck easy. And so it's the fact that most benches set up in commercial gyms don't have proper safeties. A lot of them do. I mean, a lot of benches do, depending on where you go, or people's home gyms and everything else. But you are relying on spotters to keep you safe. Whereas if you do get to failure, if you're benching high on your chest without someone there to help you immediately, there is the real possibility of the bar rolling down to your neck, your throat. That can become a real issue. And when we start talking about setting up, when you start seeing how power lifters and strength athletes with a lot of experience set up, what do? You see our face get further under the J-hooks, and we bench lower on the chest. So one of the big habits that you're always taught in strength sports, and anyone who instructs you on the bench press, is to unrack the bar with your arms completely locked, bring the bar into position, then let the bar settle before you unlock it. So instead of letting it drop too quick, because a lot of guys will unrack it and drop down, well, the bar is still above your neck, so you've got to get it into that path. So if something goes wrong, you guys see what I mean? It's the same thing. If people are used to lowering it and re-racking before they're in the correct position, and they tend to do it up here sometimes, finish the lockout up here, start lowering up here, the potential for something to go wrong in the event of a failed rep or a grip slip or anything else can drop that bar on your face, on your throat. And even without safeties in place, that's one of those things that can be eliminated just by, number one, setting yourself further under the bar. You shouldn't have to move the bar that far. And if you're benching to your lower chest, your neck and face can be behind the J-hooks, even on a bench that doesn't have safeties. Also, getting into the habit of never bringing the bar back towards the J-hooks or away from them until you are fully locked out. Learn to let the bar settle, and learn that if you do fail, this whole trying to push it over your face when you're trying to lock it out is a bad habit to get into. That is one of the big reasons people get hurt, because if something goes wrong and then their elbows rebend down and you've got it over your face, it's a problem. You got to learn that if you're going to fail, to let it come down to your lower chest, not to let it get up here. So people have to learn to maintain that same bar path. Otherwise, you're just putting yourself at a much, much higher risk of injury. So to summarize all of it, it's not that the bench press is a particularly dangerous exercise. It's that, again, people tend to push it harder than others. So there's that ego and showmanship involved in, again, competitive men with high testosterone levels or healthy testosterone levels. There is the Bad technique and associated with doing that sometimes, which could also include just racking and unracking the bar incorrectly, bad bar paths. So they are actually a muscle pulled or torn, but actually dropping the bar on yourself, because it is one of the exercises where you're putting a bar, potentially a loaded weight, above delicate parts of your body that can get you hurt or killed. And then potential muscle imbalances. So you look at those different factors, those are like the four factors that really do contribute to the injury rate on the bench press, in addition to the fact that just so many people do it. And it's not that the bench press is a particularly inherently dangerous exercise, it's just that common practices associated with it can put us at a higher risk of injury. And those risks can be largely eliminated. I mean, no exercise can ever be made 100% safe, but it certainly needs to be safer than, say, driving your car down the street. And the bench press can be brought well under that level. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.